The world, as we know, will soon come to an end.
For the biggest event in Earth's history,
California is going down!
Is your only chance for survival.
They're building spaceships. Our mission is to assure the continuity of our species.
Sunday, TSO, T-Touch Expert Solar presents 2012 on Pearl's Weekend Blockbuster.
The same hotel. The same experience. But two different prices. Trivago helps you compare over 500,000 hotels from more than 150 websites to find your ideal hotel at the best price. Hotel Trivago.
Introducing Turbo Down from Columbia Sportswear. With its Omni-Heat reflective lining, it's ultralight and super warm. Turbo Down, unleash the power of warmth. Columbia.
唔用油都炸到好味道。
飛利浦 Air Fryer 免油鍵炸鍋，用高速空氣循環技術代替油炸，幫你減少80% 油脂負擔。創新只為令你更健康，更多選擇，更多健康美味。
Innovation and you. Philips.
Wherever we are, regardless of age, race, or gender, we all put on masks to fit into various roles. How much may be hidden behind a mask? Everyone is vulnerable to HIV infection. To prevent HIV/AIDS from spreading, let's begin with understanding. Build a future of zero new infection, zero discrimination, and zero AIDS-related deaths for our next generation. Together, we can make a difference.
It's America's favorite battleground.
Today, we're here to win you over.
Who will be the last one standing?
And you just hit the peak. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Yes!
Saturday, America's Got Talent, Season 8, at 8:30 on Pearl.
Government challenged with meeting its housing target. Russians snap up expensive goods as ruble plunges. And funerals held for Pakistan children killed in school attack. Good evening. The government said today that Occupy protesters may have to pay for damage caused to public property. The Secretary for Security said proposed fees are being calculated right now. More fallout from the Occupy movement despite its end. Today, Secretary for Security Lai Tong-kwok said during a Legislative Council meeting that public structures such as barriers, road signs, rubbish bins, as well as 32 police vehicles were damaged during the protests.
There are calls in the community for a clear estimation of loss and the price that the public have to pay. Apart from tangible, quantifiable loss such as money and manpower resources, the severity of the OC impact on Hong Kong in other aspects, including rule of law, economic activity, society, in state of torn apart and public distress, and further the means of future restoration. In this connection, I maintain that all parties involved, particularly those instigators and propagators of OC, should ponder hard and account for it.
Meanwhile, the Civil Human Rights Front met with the Independent Police Complaints Council today. The group wants the council to look at whether the police abused their powers while carrying out their duties during the protests.
Some evidence proves that the police aimed at hurting the protester rather than stopping the behavior.
In response, IPCC Chairman Larry Kwok said they've informed the Complaints Against Police Office about the group's concerns. Kwok added it will take at least a year before the IPCC will be able to come up with an investigation report on the Occupy protests. The Hong Kong government has rejected a request to give testimony to the British House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee for its inquiry into the implementation of the Sino-British Joint Declaration. The Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs insists the UK has no jurisdiction over Hong Kong. Rani Samtani reports.
The British House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee held a hearing in London on Tuesday to discuss the implementation of the Sino-British Joint Declaration. Former South China Morning Post editor Jonathan Fenby gave testimony before the committee.
Something like the composition of the Electoral Committee for the Chief Executive doesn't, as I believe was laid down in the negotiations between Beijing and London, it can't be seen as broadly representative of the Hong Kong people.
He said government officials have been prioritizing relations with Beijing and ignoring the democratic aspirations of the public. Fenby also expressed concerns about press freedom in the city. When he served as editor-in-chief from 1995 to 1999, Fenby explained that he never felt any direct pressure from the Beijing or Hong Kong governments.
But I think most of the pressure on the media in Hong Kong, if you looked at it, has come from the owners who have a commercial interest which is linked to China.
Two protesters who have been camping outside the British Consulate General in Hong Kong also attended the hearing. They claim that China has violated the joint declaration and that Britain has the responsibility to monitor the implementation of the agreement. Here in Hong Kong, the SAR government rejected a request from the British Parliamentary Committee to make submissions in relation to its inquiry. Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs Raymond Tam was asked about the issue at the Legislative Council.
China has resumed sovereignty over Hong Kong on July 1, 1997. The provisions of the Joint Declaration have been fully implemented, and its purpose and objectives have also been fully fulfilled. The UK has no sovereignty, no jurisdiction, and no right of supervision over Hong Kong, and there is no such thing as moral obligation.
He explained that according to the Basic Law, the central government is responsible for foreign affairs relating to Hong Kong, and so the SAR government has no further comment on the issue. Rani Samtani, TVB News.
The number of subdivided flats have leapt by 30% over the past 2 years. The government insists there's simply no way of developing homes fast enough. Dainto reports.
Ms. Wong and her husband live in a 40-odd square foot subdivided flat in Sham Shui Po. It's just big enough for a 3-foot bed. At $2,500 a month, rent takes up almost a third of her income. She said it's really tough on her when, after a long day of work, she comes home to this cramped space. What's more, living costs keep going up so much more than wages. The government estimates there are at least 86,000 subdivided households in Hong Kong, almost 30% more than 2 years ago. Ms. Wong has been on a public housing waiting list for nearly 3 years now, but a recent inquiry showed 40,000 people are still ahead of her in the queue. The government's newly announced goal in its housing strategy is to build 290,000 public housing units in the coming decade. Secretary for Development Paul Chan said there's already enough land now to build some 250,000 flats, but he didn't say how much of it was ready for building homes. And land for the remaining 30,000 odd units will be found through rezoning and developing new areas, such as the northeastern New Territories. Chan said in the short to medium term, options are few. And the challenges are great, as developing new areas involves going through procedures such as the Town Planning Board. Today, protesters gathered outside a Town Planning Board meeting calling for the Northeast New Territories development plan to be scrapped. As part of the campaign, about 300 people are presenting their reasons one by one for their opposition to the development plan at the meeting. Cha Kai Kai of the League of Fanling North Villagers and Residents argues that the government holds a lot of vacant land in the urban areas, and that other plots, such as huge golf courses that pay only a nominal rent, can be taken back to build homes. We don't have to sacrifice the remaining few farm villages, she said. Chuk also criticised the government for rezoning public housing land in Homerton and North Point into private housing and hotels, saying it's placing too much importance on tourism and the property market. Diane Cho, TVB News.
ATV still hasn't paid its employees for November. The TV station's executive director is reportedly scrambling for help by asking shareholders to invest capital in the company as soon as possible. IPCAPO admits its failure to pay employees has reached a critical point that could affect daily operations. An ATV spokesperson insists management has heard nothing from the news department about taking any recourse. The Labor Department has completed an investigation into the station violating the employment ordinance and is consulting the Department of Justice for legal advice. Turning overseas now. Russia's embattled ruble regained some of its catastrophic losses today after the government announced it will sell foreign currency from its treasury accounts to support its currency. The ruble plunged up to 24% against the US dollar at one point yesterday, despite central bank efforts to halt the recent sell-off. Alan Buchner reports.
Russian consumers flocked to appliance and electronics shops, buying up imported products before an inevitable spike in prices. Now is the exact time to make the purchases you've been putting off, says this man, because tomorrow they may already be another price. Since January, the ruble has lost more than 50% to the US dollar. The plunge is attributed to various factors, including Western sanctions over Russia's actions in Ukraine and low world oil prices, which are battering Russia's oil-driven economic growth. Russia's cabinet held an emergency session to address the problem after a central bank interest rate increase of 6.5 basis points failed to stop the currency's slide. The intent was to encourage traders to hold on to the ruble.
But then the market reinterpreted the increase to say that this was a desperate move and the ruble just started declining more.
Russia's economic development minister said after the meeting that the ruble's exchange rate doesn't correspond with Russia's fundamental macroeconomic developments. The ruble clawed back about 5% in early trade today after the government announced it would sell some of its foreign currency for as long as necessary to support the ruble. Meanwhile, the U.S. is preparing new economic sanctions against Russia over the crisis in Ukraine. During a trip to London, Secretary of State John Kerry said the sanctions are clearly having an effect on the Russian economy.
Now, these sanctions could have been lifted months ago. These sanctions could be lifted in a matter of weeks or days, depending on the choices that President Putin takes.
Alan Buchner, TVB News.
American Alan Gross is a free man tonight after being released from a Cuban prison where he was held for the past 5 years. The 65-year-old is now on a plane bound for the United States. He was a government employee and set up internet access that bypassed local censorship in Cuba. Gross was tried and sentenced to 15 years in prison. In exchange for his release, 3 Cubans who were convicted and jailed for failing to register as foreign agents in the U.S. were set free. U.S. President Barack Obama is scheduled to make an official announcement later today. The swap could pave the way for better relations between America and the communist island nation. Pakistanis mourned today as funerals got underway for 142 people. As Tony Saban reports, most of the dead were children, killed the day before when Taliban militants stormed a school and began gunning down everyone on site.
A grim procession of coffins lined the streets in the northwestern city of Peshawar as devastated parents buried their children today. They died in the Taliban's brazen attack yesterday on a military-run school in the city. It was one of the worst atrocities in Pakistan's modern history. The Taliban said it was in revenge for Islamabad's campaign in North Waziristan to destroy the group. More than 140 people were killed, most of them school children, who were taking their exams when militants attacked without warning. The 7 militants were killed, but by the time security forces secured the school, it was too late for many students and teachers. Overnight in Peshawar, Grieving parents, relatives and friends held a candlelight vigil for the dead and wounded. In a country bitterly divided over